Happy Mother's Day. I want to thank you all, first of all, for praying for me. This past week, I had a medical procedure on Monday, and I woke up and I felt so good. I mean, I hadn't felt that good in months, and I said, Sue, I feel so good. We have to go out and get something to eat. I think I can eat. And I overdid it. And I paid the price for that a few hours later. But overall, I'm going to give that surgery a 90 out of 100. That's pretty good, and the results have been pretty good so far. So really appreciate your prayers. I'm very thankful about that. I did forget to mention last week something about numbers. Who's the author? Moses. Yeah, Christian tradition and also Jewish tradition is that Moses was the author of all of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So Moses is the author of this. Last week we were looking in Numbers chapter 1 and chapter 2. It had been a year since the Israelites had left Egypt. They had camped in Sinai. They had gone to Mount Sinai. They had gotten the law. And up to this point, they had been traveling as pretty much an unorganized mob of people, about 2 million people. At the beginning of the book of Numbers, God now begins to organize the people. And he instructs them on how they should camp. And in Exodus, we saw this last week, Moses had created the tabernacle, also known as the tent of meeting, where he would meet with the Lord, and he had placed it outside the camp. And in Numbers, the Israelites were instructed to take the tent of meeting and place it inside the camp of the Israelites, and not just inside the camp, but at the very center of the camp. And then the tribes were to camp around the tent of meeting, as it shows in this diagram here. And the instructions that they were given were very specific. It was so specific, they were told when they came into camp and set the camp up, and when they left the camp, which tribe would come first, which one would be second, which one would be third, and so on. And you can see if you're going to move that many people, you really need to do that in an organized fashion. The key point for the week that I wanted to leave us with last week was that God wants to be the center of everything in our lives. And that is an Old Testament principle, but it was also a New Testament principle as well. Now, this is not God in the center. This is the tent of meeting, but this is where God inhabited. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was, and this is where God inhabited when he was there meeting with Moses. And so he was the center of everything, and they were all to face towards the tent of meeting. Now, today what I want to do is I want to look at Numbers 3 and 4. And these 2 chapters deal with Levites and priests. And you might think, wow, that's kind of boring. But honestly, I think there's more application in these 2 chapters than I can find in any of the other chapters that we're going to be looking at. So Aaron was Moses' older brother. And Moses and Aaron were from the tribe of Levi. And God chose Aaron to be the high priest. And not only was he the high priest, but his descendants were the priests, and only his descendants were the priests. So if you were going to be a priest 100 years later or 200 years later, you had to be a descendant of Aaron. You're not a priest if you're not. And so I wanted to read you a little passage that is right at the beginning of Numbers chapter 3. This is verses 2 through 4. These are the names of the son of Aaron: Nadab the firstborn, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. These are the names of the sons of Aaron, the anointed priests whom he ordained to serve as priests. But Nadab and Abihu died before the Lord when they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai. So this is actually a restatement of an incident that actually occurred earlier. If you want to go read the whole thing, it's in Leviticus chapter 10. So you know, this afternoon you want some light reading, go and read that. And it tells the story of this. But you don't get too much more information there than we have here. It just that some translations say they offered strange fire, and this translation says it was unauthorized fire. We don't actually know what they did. We don't know the specifics. We don't know if they offered the sacrifice in a way that specifically God had prescribed them not to do, so they were rebellious, or whether they just decided to offer a sacrifice in a way that God had not told them to do, in which case they were not necessarily rebellious, but they were presumptuous. We don't know which one, but in any case, God took offense and they were killed on the spot for doing that. Aaron and the other two brothers, Eleazar and Ithamar, they were told they could not even mourn their brothers and son's death because they did something that they were not supposed to have done. There is a principle here, and I think the principle is God is not to be trifled with. I think sometimes we forget that, because I think I know, and probably you do, we trifle with God sometimes, and he's not to be trifled with. He doesn't always rain down fire on us immediately when we do things wrong, and so we kind of get a little slack sometimes, but he is not to be trifled with. In the New Testament, can you think of a situation a little bit like this in the New Testament? Yeah, I heard it, Ananias and Sapphira. So it seems like when God was doing something new, he would give a very visual demonstration of what he wanted, the way he wanted things to be done, and it would catch people's attention. So this certainly caught the attention of the Israelites at the time. I can imagine, this is my sanctified or maybe unsanctified imagination running wild here, but I can imagine that there were discussions that took place for hundreds of years afterwards that went something like this. I've taken the liberty of translating this from Hebrew into English for you. So I'm bored, let's do something different. Shake things up a bit. Are you crazy? Don't you remember what happened to Nadab and Abihu? That kind of thing. This was a lesson, and it was a lesson that for the most part, they got. In the New Testament, Ananias and Sapphira, right at the beginning of the church. So again, when God's doing something new, it's the beginning of the church. They came in and they lied about an offering that they were making. They had sold some land and they could do whatever they wanted to with the profits of the land, but they pretended like they were presenting it all to the church, and they died for it. And you read that and you think, sometimes I think, well, that's pretty severe. Well, God's not to be trifled with. So that's a good lesson. So the next thing that I want to mention is this. Back in Exodus, God had said this: "Sanctify to me every firstborn, the first offspring of every womb among the sons of Israel, both of man and beast, it belongs to me." So there's a principle here as well, and the principle is the first of everything belongs to God. The first of the people belong to God. The first of the animals belong to God. Later on, the first of the produce of the land belonged to God. That was a principle that he was putting in place here. And so now he's going to talk about this. He's going to put this into practice and show how this is going to work out. So what does it mean that all the firstborn belong to God? I mean, how? Are anybody a firstborn here? What does that mean? Okay, so we'll look in Numbers. There we go. Numbers chapter 3, we're in Numbers 3 and 4 here. "For all the firstborn are mine, and on the day that I struck them down, all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified myself, all the firstborn in Israel, from man to beast, they are mine, I am the Lord. I saved them," right? When the angel of death came over Egypt and all the firstborn in the Egyptian houses died, they didn't die in the Israeli houses. They could have, but they didn't, because of my mercy, and because I saved them, they belong to me. Okay, well, God furthermore said this: "Now behold, I have taken the Levites from among the sons of Israel instead of every firstborn." We're going to make a swap. We're going to trade. The firstborn are here, 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 here. They're all over the place. We're going to consolidate them in one group. It'll be the Levites. So I'm going to take the Levites in place of the firstborn, the first issue of the womb among the sons of Israel. So the Levites will be mine. All right, so here's a question. Is that a fair trade? You know, you got the Levites over here, you got the firstborn over here. Well, there's no way to know unless you do a census. So it's time for another census. Now, in Numbers chapter 1, I mentioned this last week, but I didn't put the verse up here. In Numbers chapter 1, God had specifically told Moses, do not count the Levites. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not list. You shall not take a census of them among the people of Israel. But now it's time to take a census of the Levites so we can find out how many there are. So Numbers chapter 3:15. Now the number of the sons of Levi by their father's household, by their families, every male from a month old and upward you shall number. So this is census number 2, found in the book of Numbers. There's quite a few of them. And this is who was being counted here. They were Levites, they were males, and they were 1 month old and upward. So I'll just give you the results of the census. Levi had three sons, and one was Gershon, and then Kohath, and then Merari. And this is how many offspring there was from each of these are like subgroups within the tribe of Levi. And so there were 7,500, 8,600, 6,200, and 22,000. Does anything about those numbers strike you? They're all very round, to the nearest 100. Kim? That's a very good, and I didn't know, I was thinking I'd put the other slide up, but if you remember back to last week, this is by far the smallest tribe. If you remember the numbers from last week, the smallest tribe listed in the census that was found in Numbers chapter 1 was Manasseh, which was like 32,200, which is, more than 10,000 more. And when they were numbering the other tribes, they only numbered the ones that were 20 and older. This group is from 1 month old and up, so a bigger age group, and still a much smaller number. So this is like half the size of any of the other tribes. So that's a good observation to make. It's a very small group. Yeah. Yeah, the numbers are wrong. Add them up. They add up to 22,300. Okay. We're going to come back and talk about that in just a second. I'm not letting that go. All right. I knew right away, but I wondered if anybody would see that. All right. So now it's time. We just numbered the Levites. Now what else do we have to number? First, we got to number the firstborn because we got to see if it's an even trade. So Numbers chapter 3, verse 40, number every firstborn male of the sons of Israel from a month old and upward and make a list of their names. So this is census 2. Here's census 3. Here's the results. These are the firstborn males, 1 month old and upward, 22,273. So this is essentially the group that was saved when the angel of death passed over. Because if they hadn't marked the doors, these people would have died. And with a few additions, because it's been over a year, and I'm sure there were a couple babies born in the Sinai, so there were a few additions, but mostly this was the group that had been protected by God from the angel of death. So 22,273. Yes?
Question.
Yes? Yeah, okay.
I have a note in my Bible that says this is the firstborn males since the Exodus.
This is only 3.7% of the 600,000 that was mentioned in the survey in chapter 1. So this cannot be an exhaustive list of all the firstborn people, males in the nation of Israel. It cannot be, because unless every family had approximately 65 children. And some of them might have, but they didn't on average have that. So yeah, there's different ways to suggest how they came up with this particular, who got counted in this firstborn count. Surely there was more instruction than what we have here as to who would be counted. It possibly had to do with being under a certain age. Some people suggest the age of accountability or things like this, but some standard was used that we just don't know what it is. But 22,273 is the total number. So we have 22,000-ish, because the numbers don't add up there at the top, that were Levites, and you got 22,273. Is that like, when I was a kid, they used to say close enough for horseshoes and hand grenades and atom bombs, right? Is it close enough? No, it's not close enough, right? You got 273 you got to account for. And so that brings us to Numbers chapter 3, verses 46 through 47. And for the ransom of the 273 of the firstborn of the sons of Israel, who are in excess beyond the Levites, you shall take 5 shekels apiece per head. From the firstborn of the sons of Israel, he took the money in terms of the shekel of the sanctuary, 1,365 shekels total. Now, the math here all works. Did you check that? I mean, 273 times 5 is 1,365. So, it wasn't close enough is good enough. It was, God says, these are mine, and they will all be. The word here is ransomed. Some texts use the word redeemed. So the fact that these numbers work, 5 times 273 is 1,369, this tells us that when we go back here, the numbers in red there are the right numbers. I mean, the 22,000 and the 22,273 do differ by 273. So, just putting the text together, we can see those are the right numbers. But again, we look at the numbers up at the top, and they don't add up to 22,000. So that tells us that if there's a number that's wrong, where is it? It's at the top. It's one of these numbers for the tribes of Levi. Does that bother you that there would be a number that's wrong, or that there has to be a number that's wrong? Well, one of the things you have to understand is we believe the Bible is inerrant, that it's perfect, that it's right in its original writings. And those original writings were called the autographs. How many of the autographs do we have? We have none of them. So when things got old and worn out, they would be replaced. And after the very original documents were replaced, they were known as manuscripts. So we have manuscripts for all of the Bible. Some of them go back a long time, some of them go back not as long, but we have manuscripts. We don't have any of the autographs. So it's important to know that the scribes were meticulous when they were making a copy. The scribes were essentially photocopy machines. They weren't supposed to think, they weren't supposed to edit, they were supposed to copy, and that was their job. And they would go to great lengths counting the number of symbols they put on each page so that they could try to make sure that they never made a mistake made a copy mistake. But occasionally, some mistakes would creep into a copy. And so there are people that will argue, well, this is like, do you ever play the game telephone tag? Where somebody whispers something to somebody and they whisper something to somebody and they whisper it. And then, the person at the end says what they heard, and it's literally nothing like what the person started. And there's people that go, well, that's the way the scriptures are. I mean, they've been copied and copied and copied, and we can't possibly know what the scriptures said originally. Even though maybe originally they were perfect, we can't know what that was. Well, yeah, we can. Right? I want you to know that you can be confident that we have what God wants us to have. First of all, because God wants us to have it. But there's more reasons than that. Just logically, and we have proof that they were very, very meticulous in their copying abilities. So I want to just go off and veer off and talk about this just for a little bit. This might seem really strange to you, but if you go back to the 1940s, the oldest Hebrew manuscripts of the Old Testament that we had were from around 900 AD. Does that surprise you? We have Greek manuscripts from the New Testament that go back to 150 AD. So we have many, 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 many Greek manuscripts older than the oldest Hebrew manuscripts that we have. Does that seem a little backwards to you? The reason seems to be because the Hebrew scribes had a philosophy of translating, or not translating, philosophy of copying that went along the lines of they believed that the copy was better than the original. In this sense, you didn't make a copy until the original was in bad shape. It had holes in it, it had tears in it, it was wrinkled and faded and old. And so they would very, very meticulously, if they had microscopes, they would have used microscopes, they very meticulously, painstakingly copy till now they had something that anybody could read. And then they would take that old original that they had made the copy of and they would throw it away. Because somebody might not be able to read it. They might come to some blurred area or something and it might confuse them. So they would just throw it away. You know what they would do with it a lot of times? They put it in their scrap pile. Do you have a scrap paper pile at home? I do. It's about this thick. It's pieces of old math tests from years ago. And anytime I need to write something out, I just open up my drawer and I pull out this piece of paper. It's got all kinds of junk on one side, math problems and stuff, and I just turn it over and use the other side. That's what they would do. They just throw these things in a pile, and they didn't put any trust or faith or value in it because it was the old. It wasn't the new that's over here that anybody can read and understand. So when we started to go around and getting interested in manuscripts, what did we do? We went to the old synagogues and went through their scrap piles and came across the oldest manuscripts that we had. So the oldest manuscripts in Hebrew were from about 900 AD. But then in the 1940s and 1950s, there was great discoveries. What was it? Yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls. There was a religious community near the Dead Sea, and they had all kinds of documents and stuff that they had hidden in caves, and they had been well preserved in those caves for a very long time. This was a community that was from about 100 to 200 years before the time of Christ, and they started to go into different caves and find different scrolls, and they found all kinds of documents. What was most interesting was they found a complete copy of Psalms, complete, and a complete copy of Isaiah. Complete copy of Isaiah. And then they also found bits and pieces of lots of other Old Testament as well. Most of the books in the Old Testament were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, at least parts. But complete copy of Isaiah. And the Isaiah one is the one that is so interesting because when you think about Isaiah, what are you thinking about? Isaiah probably has more prophecies about the Messiah than any other book in the Old Testament. And the thing about Isaiah is the liberal theologians, they would go, well, clearly this part of Isaiah was written after the time of Jesus because it so obviously is pointing to Jesus that it had to have been written afterwards. They would actually say things like this. And all of a sudden they find this, and it's dated 100 years before the time of Christ. And it's all the prophecies, all the messianic prophecies that are about the Christ who was to come. Of all the chapters in Isaiah, the one that is to me, there are many wonderful chapters, but Isaiah 53 is just a fantastic chapter. It is the most concentrated messianic prophecy section in the Old Testament. If you haven't read it recently, go home and read it this afternoon. I just want to read a little bit of it. Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we shall desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgression, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. And it goes on and on and on. And it talks about his death and his burial, even specifics about who he died with and things about his burial. It's so obviously talking about Jesus. I probably mentioned this before, but when I was young, I had a good friend, Mark, who was Jewish. And I said to him one day, I said, when you read Isaiah 53, what do you think? I mean, what do you think that's talking about? And his response was, my rabbi has told us we are never to read Isaiah 53 because we will be sure to mistranslate it, or not mistranslate, but misunderstand it. So we're not supposed to read it. I thought, oh man. So I want to look at Isaiah 53 for just a second, because what we had was the oldest manuscripts we had in 1940 were from 900 AD. All of a sudden, we have a manuscript from 100 BC, 1,000 years earlier. What can we now do? We can now look at the two and see, well, how many changes took place over 1,000 years? Because the Old Testament that had been written 1,000 years earlier than that. So you go, well, if this much took place in 1,000 years, you'd probably have about the same amount of change in another 1,000 years. How much change was there? Well, here's what is in Isaiah 53. There are 167 Hebrew words in Isaiah 53. There are 17 letters different in the manuscripts that are 1,000 years apart. 17 letters, not words, 17 letters. 10 of them are differences in spelling. 4 of them are different conjunctions, and 3 of them represent one word that's in the one manuscript and not in the other. None of this changes anything about what the passage is clearly talking about, what it clearly means. And so I wanted to show you that because, we don't have the autographs. We don't have the originals of any of the scripture, but we have what God wants us to have. And you can trust that, and you can be sure of that. Now, when it comes back to this slide, it turns out we have a pretty good idea that middle number up there in red is the number that was wrong. It was 8,600, and it probably should be 8,300. And you go, well, how do you know that? Well, the Old Testament, one of the very first translations of the Old Testament into another language was into what language? Greek. It was done about 250 BC. And it was done by 70 or 72 scholars. And that Greek text, that Greek translation is known as the Septuagint. In the Septuagint, the number for the size of the Kohaths, this subgroup is 8,300. So you go, well, that's not even the same language. Why would that matter? Well, they were translating from Hebrew, which means they had Hebrew manuscripts that they were using to do the translation. Do we have those manuscripts that they were using? Well, no, because we don't have anything before the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this was 150 years before the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they had access to a manuscript that we don't have access to, but they said that when they translated from that older manuscript, the number was 8,300, and so that number probably is 8,300. It doesn't make that much difference, but maybe that matters to you. Okay, another word for ransomed is redeemed. Sometimes in the translations it's ransomed, sometimes it's redeemed. And God is teaching his people that a debt that is owed has to be paid, and the entire redemption price has to be paid. I think this foreshadows the ultimate redemption that takes place in the New Testament. when God himself becomes the complete payment for the debt that we could never have paid. What is the debt that we could never have paid? Yeah, our sin debt. We could never have paid that. So this is a little slightly off topic, but we're going to sing this song because I like this song. This is Redeemed How I Love to Proclaim It, and it is sung to two different tunes, and we'll sing the faster one. All right, so sing with me if you want. Redeemed how I love to proclaim it, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through his infinite mercy, his child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, redeemed, his child and forever I am. Okay, chapter 4. We just finished chapter 3. In chapter 4, God commands another census. So this will be the fourth census. It says this, take a census of the descendants of Kohath. That's in one verse. Another verse says, take a census of the sons of Gershon. And then in another verse, as for the sons of Merari, you shall number them by their families. So this is another census of the Levites, but it's different from the one that was done before. So in this particular census, it's Levites, it's males, those two are the same, but this time it's only the males between the age of 30 and 50. Why only the males between the age of 30 and 50? Why did that matter? That is when the Levites, at 30, they entered their profession. They became workers at that point. And they worked until they were 50, and then they retired. I think they were like state employees or something. 30 to 50. So anyway, this is the command of another census, and these were the numbers. From the Gershon, in that age group, it was 2,630, Kohath 2,750, and then Merari 3,200. The total is 8,580. It is, in fact, 8,580. So they do add up. Okay. The rest of this chapter has things about what their responsibilities were going to be and where they were going to camp, because they had not been assigned a camping spot back when all the camping spots were assigned. So Kohath was assigned the location just to the south of the tent of meeting. And their jobs were the following. The Kohathites were responsible for transporting the Ark of the Covenant, the table, the lampstands, the altars, and the utensils of the sanctuary. This is right out of Numbers chapter 4. And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the holy objects and all the furnishings of the sanctuary when the camp is to set out, after that the sons of Kohath should come to carry them. But they must not touch that should be holy, not hold things, the holy things, lest they die. Okay, so they were not even allowed to see the holy things. The priests would go in and cover them, and only after these things were covered were these people to come in and on poles move things from place to place. And again, I think this deals again with that first thing I said. God is not to be trifled with. I mean, God says here, look, do this or die. Do you know of any case where somebody didn't do this? Yeah, in 2 Samuel chapter 6, we have this story. David is preparing to build the temple. And he doesn't get to build it, but he's preparing the things. And he wants to bring the Ark of the Covenant from where it was located, I think in Shiloh. He wants to bring it to Jerusalem, the new capital. And it says, and they placed the Ark of God on a new cart. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out toward the Ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen nearly upset it. And the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah, and God struck him down there for his irreverence, and he died there by the Ark of God. So what did they do wrong here? Okay, yeah, clearly he reached out and touched it, but somebody else said something else. They put it on a cart. God gave very specific instructions. There's no animals involved. There's no transporting of things like this. The Kohathites' job was to carry all the holy things on poles. And it was not to be moved like this. So the very fact that they were already doing that was wrong. And then it upset, and he reached out and touched it, and he died. So God said, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. And they did it, and that's what happened. The second group was the Gershonites, the descendants of Gershon, and they were going to be on the west side of the tent of meeting. Their jobs, and don't even ask me what these things sometimes mean, because I don't know what they mean, but this is what it says in Scripture. It says they were responsible to carry the curtains of the tabernacle, I get that, and the screens for the doorways. I don't know, when I think of screens, I'm thinking about something to keep the flies out, and I don't know what that means, but it meant something to them, and that was their job, was to transport it. Does that look like you need 2,000 people to move? I don't know. I mean, maybe it was a lot. I don't know. Merari, the Merarites, they were going to be on the north side of the tent of meeting, and their job is this. They were responsible to carry the boards, the bars, the pillars, the sockets, the pegs, and the cords of the tabernacle. So whatever's holding this, up, whatever they're pounding in the ground to hold this up, that was their responsibility to carry that. And then finally, to the east, to the rising sun, the priests. That would be Aaron and his descendants would be over there on the east, and they would take up that position there. So last week, I pointed out that God is to be the center of everything, right? God was in the middle of this, but there's a nuance here going on. Were the people, look at the picture, were the people, the general, what do you call the unwashed commoners, were they able to come directly to God? No. There was a buffer. There was something. What did they need if they wanted to come to God? They needed a go-between. They needed a mediator. I think that's an Old Testament principle. The mediator in the Old Testament was the Levites and the priests. So that is a principle from the Old Testament. I think there's several different lessons that we can learn from these two chapters. And again, it's chapters that deal with the Levites and the priests. How interesting is this? Well, I think it's applicable. First of all, God's not to be trifled with. I mean, Abihu and his brother, whose name escapes me at the moment, they learned that. But the priest that reached out and touched the holy thing, the Ark of the Covenant later on, he learned it too. God is not to be trifled with. Number two, the first of everything belongs to God, the firstborn animals, the firstborn people. The first of everything that they had was God's. I think that should be true for us as well, right? At least we should think about things that way. I'm not saying I'm going to swap my firstborn son for something else. I'm just saying that you think of what you possess and what you own as being God's possessions, and that they're his first, and I have use of these things. Number three, debts have to be paid. That's a serious thing. It has to be paid to the exact amount. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, people need a mediator to God. In the Old Testament, they needed the Levites. They needed the priests. Who do we need as a mediator to God? That's exactly right. 1 Timothy 2, 5 through 6. For there is one God, and there is one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all. That's who our mediator is. And so we cannot come directly to God, but we can come directly to God through God, the Son. And that's how we do it. Next week, if you care to read ahead, we will be looking at chapter 7 and chapters 10 through 12. Okay. Happy Mother's Day.